We all breathe, right? I mean, it's something we
Duh.
kind of take for granted until, well, maybe we can't.
Yeah, for sure.
And, these days, with air quality getting worse in lots of places and more people having breathing problems, finding the right treatments is becoming super important.
Absolutely. And that's where nebulizers come in. They're becoming a really crucial part of respiratory care.
Okay, so we've got this market report that's really caught our eye. It paints a picture of the global nebulizers market. It gives us a snapshot of where things stand in 2025 and then takes us all the way to 2033 to see where it might be headed.
And what's really interesting is, right off the bat, you see it's not just some niche little market.
Right.
It's a big deal. And it's only going to get bigger.
So that's exactly what we're going to do in this deep dive. We're going to break down this report, pull out the key takeaways. What's happening in the nebulizers market right now? What can we expect in the future? What are the big trends, the drivers, the challenges?
Yeah, because if you think about it, looking at this market can actually tell us a lot about where healthcare is going in general, what kind of new technology is being developed. How are we going to treat people in the future, especially when it comes to respiratory health?
All right, let's start with the numbers. The report says that the global nebulizers market in 2025 is valued at, get this, $1,252.6 million US dollars.
Whoa, that's a pretty big chunk of change.
Yeah, and it's projected to grow to 2088.67 million by 2033.
So that's a jump of, what, like over $800 million?
Exactly, a pretty substantial increase.
Yeah.
And the compound annual growth rate, that's the CAGR, the average growth year on year, it sits at 6.60% between 2025 and 2033.
So that's solid growth, pretty consistent over a good number of years.
Now, the report points to something pretty interesting, something that's kind of driving this whole expansion.
Yeah.
The aging population.
Oh, yeah, that makes sense, right?
The more people we have living longer, well, the more likely we are to see age-related health issues, including those that affect breathing.
Makes sense. As people get older, they're more susceptible to things like COPD, asthma, chronic respiratory illnesses like that.
Exactly.
So the demand for good, effective treatments, especially those that are easy to use, like nebulizers, is just naturally going to increase.
Right. So let's break things down by region. In 2025, North America, they're the biggest players, taking up more than 40% of the global market. We're talking 463.46 million US dollars.
Wow, North America in the lead, huh?
Yeah, but their projected growth rate from 2025 to 2033 is sitting at 5.1%. So it's good, it's positive, but it's not the highest.
Interesting. So they're starting from a strong position, but maybe other regions are catching up?
Yeah, possibly.
Yeah.
And, if you look closer at North America, the U.S. is the major contributor there.
Right, unsurprisingly. Big market.
Yeah, in 2025, it was $365.67 million.
Okay.
With a growth rate of 4.9%.
So a little bit lower than the overall North American average.
Exactly. And then you've got Canada. They're at $55.62 million with a slightly higher growth rate of 5.9%.
Oh, Canada doing well.
They are. And Mexico comes in at $42.18 million, 5.6% CGR.
So they're kind of in the middle there.
Right in the middle. Now, the report points to a few reasons why North America is leading the pack. First off, there's a higher occurrence of respiratory illnesses there.
Okay.
Then you've got a well-developed healthcare system.
So people have better access to healthcare in general.
Exactly. And because of that, there's a pretty strong demand for good treatments. Also, you've got major companies operating in this space. They're based in North America. They're innovating, creating new products.
Right, so they're driving things forward.
Yeah, and the regulations, they're pretty supportive of these kinds of medical devices. And there's a huge push towards portability.
Portability, that seems to be a big thing these days.
It is. People want devices that are easy to use, easy to take with them, so they can manage their health no matter where they are.
Yeah, because you don't want your treatment to tie you down, do you? You want to be able to live your life.
Exactly. Now, let's hop over to Europe. In 2025, they're holding over 30% of the global market share.
Okay, so a good chunk.
Yeah, 363.25 million US dollars. And their projected growth rate is a steady 5.7%.
So not quite as high as North America overall, but still decent.
Yeah, definitely still growing. And
Right.
within Europe, there's a lot of variation between countries.
Right, it's not just one big blob.
Exactly. So the UK, their market's valued at 61.03 million with a pretty good growth rate of 6.5%.
Okay, UK doing well.
And then Germany's leading the way with 71.92 million and a 5.9% increase.
Germany, yeah, not surprising. They often have a strong healthcare sector.
Totally. France is at 33.42 million with a 4.9% growth. Italy's a little behind them at 31.24 million, 5.1% growth.
Okay, so France and Italy are kind of similar in terms of market size and growth.
Yeah, pretty much. Now, Russia's interesting. They're at 56.30 million with 4.7% growth.
So a decent market, but growing a bit slower than some others.
Yeah. And then Spain comes in at 29.79 million, 4.8% growth.
So a bit smaller, but still in the game.
Definitely. And, similar to North America, the report highlights that people in Europe are increasingly looking for portable and user-friendly nebulizers.
Right, so that trend is pretty consistent across different regions. Makes sense, I guess.
Totally. And of course, Europe's known for having strong healthcare systems, which plays a big role in making these devices available to people who need them.
Yeah, access is key, right?
Absolutely. Now get this. The region that's really rocking and rolling, growth-wise, is Asia Pacific. They're calling it APAC.
APAC. They're often the ones to watch, aren't they? In a lot of industries.
Yeah, they are. And in 2025, they hold about 23% of the global market. That's $300.62 million US dollars. But their projected growth rate is the highest by far at 9.3%.
Whoa, 9.3%. That's almost double what North America is expecting.
Yeah, it's huge. And if we break it down by country, China's a big market, of course. 126.26 million with 8.8% growth.
China, yeah, massive population, lots of potential for growth in healthcare.
Totally. But get this, India. They're showing the most rapid increase, 11.2% growth with a $30.06 million market.
11.2%. That's incredible.
It is. And then you've got Japan at 41.49 million, 7.8% growth. South Korea is at 36.07 million with 8.4%. Australia's a bit smaller, 15.63 million, 8.6% growth.
So lots of different countries in APAC all growing at a pretty good clip.
Yeah, Singapore's another one, 6.01 million, 9.6% growth.
So even the smaller markets are seeing strong growth.
They are. Taiwan's at 11.72 million, 9.1% growth. And Southeast Asia as a whole, that's 19.84 million with a 10.1% growth rate.
Wow, those are impressive numbers.
They are. And, the report points to several reasons for this rapid expansion in APAC. There's unfortunately a rise in air pollution, which can trigger all sorts of respiratory problems.
Yeah, air pollution is a huge problem in a lot of those rapidly developing countries.
It is. And then there's increased awareness of healthcare. People are becoming more proactive about their health.
That's a good thing.
Definitely. And of course, APAC has huge populations, so there's just naturally more demand. But there are other factors too, like improvements in healthcare infrastructure.
So more hospitals, better facilities, that kind of thing?
Exactly. And the rise of home healthcare. People are wanting to manage their health at home, which nebulizers make a lot easier.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And then you've got government initiatives in some countries. They're actively promoting respiratory health and access to treatment.
So the governments are getting involved, trying to improve things.
They are. And in some cases, nebulizers are actually a very cost-effective treatment option compared to other methods.
So it's a combination of factors kind of all coming together to create this perfect storm of growth in APAC.
Exactly. Now let's move on to South America. They account for over 5% of the global market. That's 47.60 million US dollars in 2025. With a projected growth rate of 7.3%.
So a decent-sized market and good growth.
Yeah, and within South America, Brazil and Argentina are the key players. Brazil's got a market size of 20.37 million with a 7.9% growth rate, while Argentina is at 8 million with a slightly higher 8.2% growth rate.
Okay, so they're both on an upward trajectory.
Definitely. And the report suggests this growth is being driven by a combination of things. First, there's a high prevalence of respiratory illnesses in South America.
Okay.
Second, access to healthcare is improving, so more people are getting the treatment they need.
That's always good to hear.
It is. And third, there's just a growing awareness of respiratory health in general.
So people are becoming more informed about the conditions and the treatment options available.
Absolutely. Now let's talk about the Middle East. They represent about 2% of the global market, with a size of 50.1 million US dollars in 2025 and a growth rate of 7.9%.
So a smaller market, but they're growing at a good pace.
They are. And in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia is the largest market at 17.64 million, with an 8.2% growth rate. Then there's the UAE at 10.32 million, 8.4% growth. Turkey's at 4.01 million, 8.5% growth. Qatar is also at 4.01 million, but with a slightly lower 7.4% growth rate. And Egypt is at 3.01 million, 7.7% growth.
So a bit of a mix there, but overall positive growth across the Middle East.
Yeah, definitely. And, the drivers behind this growth are pretty similar to what we've seen in other regions. There's a rise in respiratory disorders, healthcare infrastructure is improving, there's greater access to technology.
Yeah, those are all good things for healthcare in general.
They are. And then, of course, there's the expansion of home healthcare and increased government spending on health.
So governments are prioritizing healthcare, which is a positive sign.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Now, last but not least, there's Africa. They account for about 1% of the global market, with a size of 27.56 million US dollars in 2025 and a growth rate of 6.9%.
Okay, so a smaller market share, but still growing at a decent rate.
Yeah, and within Africa, South Africa is the largest market at 9.70 million, with a 7.8% growth rate, while Nigeria has a market of 2.20 million with a 7.1% increase.
So those are the two key players in Africa.
They are. And, the report points out that while access to healthcare can be limited in some parts of Africa, the increasing number of respiratory illnesses and growing awareness are creating potential for growth.
Yeah, it's a challenging situation, but there's definitely a need for effective treatments. And as awareness grows and healthcare infrastructure improves, there's definitely potential for nebulizers to play a bigger role in Africa.
Absolutely. Now let's shift gears a bit and talk about the different types of nebulizers that are out there. The report suggests that mesh nebulizers are likely to become the most popular type.
Oh, yeah, mesh nebulizers. They're pretty cool, actually.
What makes them so special?
Well, they're usually very small and lightweight, very portable. A lot of them are battery powered, too, which is great for people on the go.
Makes sense. Portability seems to be a big deal.
Yeah, nobody wants to be lugging around a big, clunky nebulizer.
Right.
Plus, mesh nebulizers use this vibrating mesh technology to turn the liquid medicine into a really fine mist, which is easier to inhale and gets the medication deeper into the lungs.
Okay, so that's a big advantage.
It is. And it also means less waste, so you're getting the most out of your medication.
Makes sense. But the report does mention that the cost of mesh nebulizers could be a factor. They can be a bit pricier than some other types.
Yeah, that's true. Mesh technology is pretty advanced, so it comes at a price.
Yeah.
That could be a barrier for some people, especially in areas where healthcare costs are a big concern.
Right. Okay, so on the flip side, the report says that ultrasonic nebulizers are the fastest growing segment. What's driving that?
Ultrasonic nebulizers, yeah, they've got some cool features. They're generally very quiet, which is great if you're using them at night or if you're sensitive to noise.
Oh yeah, that makes a big difference, especially for kids, I imagine.
Totally. And they can create an even finer mist than mesh nebulizers, so the medication particles are really tiny and get deep into the lungs.
Okay, so that's a big plus.
It is. Especially for people with certain respiratory conditions where you really need that deep lung penetration.
Makes sense. But again, like mesh nebulizers, they tend to be more expensive.
Yeah, unfortunately, you often get what you pay for.
That's true. The report also briefly lists a bunch of other types of nebulizers. There are pneumatic, vented pneumatic, breath-actuated pneumatic, standalone ultrasonic, portable ultrasonic, static mesh, vibrating mesh.
Wow, that's a lot of options.
It is. It sounds like there's a nebulizer out there for just about every need and preference.
Yeah, and I think that speaks to how much innovation is happening in this field. Manufacturers are really trying to create nebulizers that are effective, easy to use, and convenient for all sorts of different people and conditions.
That's great. Now let's talk about who's actually using these nebulizers. The report says that clinics are the largest segment of the market.
Oh, interesting. So not hospitals.
Not primarily, no.
Why do you think that is?
Well, the report suggests that clinics are kind of like this middle ground between getting care at home and needing to go to a hospital.
Right, they're kind of the in-between step.
Exactly. And they're often the main point of care for people who have chronic respiratory conditions that need regular management.
So they're kind of like the regular checkup spot for people with breathing problems.
Yeah, exactly. Now, the report does say that the home healthcare segment is growing really quickly.
Makes sense with the whole portability trend we've been talking about.
Totally. People want to be able to manage their health at home, and portable nebulizers make that a lot easier.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. It's got to be more comfortable and convenient to use your nebulizer in your own space.
Absolutely. The report also talks about the potential cost savings of home healthcare and how it can just generally improve people's quality of life.
Right, so it's not just about convenience, it's about a whole bunch of benefits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the report also briefly mentions other users like hospitals and emergency centers.
Yeah, they're obviously still important for those more acute cases, right?
Definitely. But the trend seems to be moving towards managing conditions on an outpatient basis or at home whenever possible.
Yeah, that seems to be happening across all sorts of healthcare areas, not just respiratory stuff.
Totally. Now, let's dive into some of the forces that are shaping this market. What's driving it forward? What are the challenges? What are the trends we can expect to see in the future?
All right, sounds good.
So first off, the drivers. The report highlights a few key ones. First, there's growing awareness of respiratory health. People are starting to understand how important it is to take care of their lungs and catch problems early.
Yeah, prevention is always better than cure, right?
Exactly. And then there's the unfortunate reality of increasing air pollution around the world.
Ugh. Yeah, that's not good.
It's a big problem, and it's leading to more respiratory issues, which
Hmm.
obviously increases the need for treatments like nebulizers.
It's a shame that something like air pollution is actually driving the growth of this market. But at least there are treatments available for people who are affected.
That's true. And then, of course, there's just a general increase in the number of people with respiratory diseases like asthma and COPD.
Yeah, those are chronic conditions that require ongoing management, so they're going to drive demand for nebulizers for the long term.
Absolutely. Now, let's talk about the restraints. What's holding this market back?
Well, the report mentions two main things. First, the cost of those fancy high-tech nebulizers, especially the mesh and ultrasonic ones, can be a barrier for some people.
Yeah, that's a valid point. Not everyone has access to the latest and greatest technology.
And second, there are other ways to deliver respiratory medications, like inhalers and pills, which might be more appropriate or more affordable in some cases.
So there's some competition from other treatment options.
Exactly.
Okay, looking ahead, what trends can we expect to see shaping the nebulizers market in the future?
Well, the report highlights a couple of interesting trends. First, there's a growing focus on environmentally sustainable healthcare solutions.
Oh, that's a big one these days.
It is. And in the nebulizer market, that could mean a demand for devices that are more energy efficient, use less plastic, produce less waste in general.
So kind of a green nebulizer.
Yeah, exactly. And maybe even nebulizers that are made from more sustainable materials.
Interesting. And the other big trend, which we've already talked about quite a bit, is the increasing demand for home healthcare devices.
Yeah, that seems like a trend that's here to stay.
Definitely. So we can expect to see even more portable, user-friendly nebulizers that make it easier than ever for people to manage their respiratory health at home.
Yeah, and maybe even nebulizers that can connect to smartphones or other devices so people can track their treatment and share data with their doctors.
Wow, that's pretty futuristic.
It is, but it's not that far-fetched. Technology is moving so fast these days.
Totally. Now, last but not least, let's talk about the big players in this market. Who are the companies that are driving innovation and shaping the future of nebulizers?
All right, let's name some names.
The report describes the nebulizers market as highly competitive, with a mix of both big global companies and smaller regional players.
So, a pretty crowded field.
Yeah. Some of the big names they mentioned include Omron Corporation, GE Healthcare, Koninklijke Philips NV, Allied Healthcare, Victura Group plc, PARI Respiratory Equipment Inc., Aerogen, Devilbiss Healthcare LLC, Briggs Healthcare, and Burr GmbH.
Wow, that's quite a list.
It is. And these companies are constantly innovating, developing new products, expanding their distribution networks, trying to meet the needs of a really diverse range of patients.
So it's a dynamic market, lots of competition, which is usually good for consumers because it drives prices down and leads to better products.
Totally. And the report even highlights a couple of recent product launches as examples of this ongoing innovation. For example, in March 2023, Omron Healthcare launched their new NEU100 mesh nebulizer in the U.S.
Oh, yeah, I heard about that one. It's supposed to be super small and portable.
Yeah, that's what they're emphasizing.
Yeah.
It's all about portability and convenience.
And it uses mesh technology, right?
Exactly.
So that fits right in with the trends we were talking about.
Totally. And then in April 2023, Philips Respironics introduced their new Inaspire Go nebulizer in Europe.
Okay, another portable one.
Yeah, this one is also super lightweight, portable, and it has a rechargeable battery.
So it's all about making it easy for people to use their nebulizer wherever they are.
Exactly.
It's like they're trying to make nebulizers as unobtrusive as possible so they don't interfere with your life.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. So to sum it all up, it's clear that the global nebulizers market is on a major upswing.
Absolutely. Those growth numbers are pretty impressive.
We're talking about a jump from $1,252.6 million in 2025 to a projected $2,088.67 million by 2033.
And a lot of that growth is being driven by the aging population and the increasing prevalence of respiratory diseases.
Exactly. And while North America is currently in the lead, the Asia-Pacific region is growing the fastest.
And we've seen a lot of innovation in terms of the types of nebulizers available. Mesh nebulizers seem to be the future, but ultrasonic nebulizers are also gaining popularity.
And there's a big push towards home healthcare, with more and more people wanting to manage their conditions at home.
Which is great. It gives people more control over their health and their lives.
Totally. But we've also talked about some of the challenges, like the cost of those advanced nebulizers and the competition from other treatment options.
Yeah, those are important factors to consider.
Absolutely. And then there are those exciting trends towards sustainability and even more personalized, connected healthcare solutions.
So the future of nebulizers is looking pretty bright.
It is. It's a fascinating market to watch. And as we wrap up this deep dive, here's something for you to ponder. As nebulizers become even more advanced and home healthcare becomes even more common, how might respiratory treatments become even more tailored and personalized?
That's a good question.
Yeah. And what will that mean for both patients and the healthcare industry as a whole?
It's definitely something to think about.
If you want to explore this further, you could look into the specifics of different nebulizer technologies, check out how air quality regulations might affect this market, or even dive into the role of telehealth in managing respiratory conditions from home.
Yeah, there's a lot more to learn about this fascinating and rapidly evolving field.
There definitely is. So thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and happy breathing, everyone.
Take care.